The Urban Renewal meeting, Wednesday, October 21st, the City of Oregon City, call to order. And we'll begin roll call.
You want me to start?
Yes, please.
Doug Nealing.
Graham Peterson.
Brian Shaw.
Alice Norris.
Rob Crocker.
Don Slack.
Nancy Walters.
James Nacita.
Daphne West.
Larry Patterson.
Can we go on? Okay.
Nancy Krashar.
Yes, please, if we just...
Good afternoon, I'm Dave Leland, Leland Consulting Group. Brian Vanderman, Leland Consulting Group. Lloyd Purdy from downtown.
Nancy Ide, City Recorder.
Scott Archer, Community Services Director.
Dan Bretlock, Community Development.
Carrie Bankhead, City Manager's Office.
Great. Carrie? Okay. We have any citizens' comments? Don't have very many citizens. Future agenda items?
Did you introduce yourself?
Yes, I did.
You did. Oh,
I did. Did I not, Miss Ide?
Yes, you did.
oh, he did.
Go.
Okay.
Future agenda items? Nothing. Miss West.
I have a...
Or Commissioner West.
Oh, Miss West works too.
Okay.
I have, since Mr. Purdy's here tonight, both Lloyd and myself have been speaking at meetings on our Main Street program. I'm wondering if you would care to have a presentation, a 15-minute or less presentation on, or an update on what's happening on Main Street from Lloyd or myself or him or both at a future session. Then everybody knows where we're at.
Okay, well, one of the things that I was hoping we would do was I was hoping we'd have a recap of the storefront project, some of the befores and afters, so that we
Storefront signs, too.
Yeah, and the signs, so that we set up here, but it maybe give us a little flavor of what some of our actions have accomplished. So we could combine those two.
Mr. Purdy could integrate that all into his...
Everybody in agreement with that? Okay. Sure. Any others? Does the agenda need any revision or change? We'll adopt the agenda as written then. And we'll move into general business. 5A, receive report from Dave Leland Consulting Group on Main Street. Our city manager, Mr. Patterson.
I'm going to turn this over to Dave Leland.
Mr. Chairman, and members of the Commission, I'm Dave Leland. With me is Brian Vanderman. Brian's our senior associate and has been helping me with this project. Okay. Good. We have about 30 minutes, Larry? Okay. I don't... You can face any way you want.
I'm okay. I'm going to move.
Okay. What we're going to do is, several months ago, several of us from the commission ourselves walked through downtown and made observations, and then we sent in a memorandum which was distributed, probably a month ago, and got picked up in the newspaper largely verbatim. So I'm not going to go back over that again, but there was a lot of interest during the course of this tour about downtown housing, and particularly on the north end. The south end is really the heart of Main Street, and Lloyd's going to talk about that, I believe, at length tomorrow morning at his breakfast, or at the breakfast for the downtown. Which way does this? Okay. So what we would like to go through, and I'll try to get through this quickly, Brian and I, is to talk about some of the principles of downtown revitalization, look at housing on the north end, and then a little bit about public-private partnerships. And you've probably seen a few of these slides before, but it doesn't hurt to revisit some of them. In addition to the team of Leland Consulting Group and Stasny Brunn Architects, and Don has been traveling, Don Stasny's been out of the country quite a bit this past month or so, I asked Lee Iverson, an architect from Newport Beach who works extensively throughout the United States. He was the architect for Orenco Station and the designer for Orenco Station for Villebois. He's done a lot of work nationally for home builders. and works throughout the West, predominantly in the West and Southwest, and has a variety of product. And if you've never been through one of his houses, it's worth a trip, because he has figured out how to take a limited amount of space and have it appear to be 25-30% bigger. He has figured out how to get rid of hallways, which is amazing. And it adds this sense of volume to it. It's quite interesting. So we asked Lee for some help. So just some of the principles of downtown revitalization. First of all, what makes a great downtown? And it's particularly in Oregon City, where you have this wonderful historic connection, the sense of place, and I mean, these are the kinds of ingredients that Lloyd and his team is working on very carefully, particularly in the shopping district. But it's also about housing and other components, so that it's a complete downtown. It's the heart of the community. It becomes sort of the living room for a community, and its role in the strength of the community cannot be understated. It needs to be a place that people come back to time and time again. It gives a sense of pride and ownership to the city. It's also a mixed-use environment, and doesn't necessarily mean that all the uses have to be mixed on the same piece of real estate, but collectively, districts are the heart of downtowns, and different parts of downtown take on a different characteristic. The retail core is one component. Then you've got the waterfront, the very north end at the Cove, the landfill area, which we hope will be developed in the near future, and then there's the north end itself, which is neither a retail a retail district, but it's really an area in transition, and that's where the heart of our discussion is going to focus tonight. And what we see is that there is a correlation between the quality of the downtown and the value of the community as it's perceived by the people that live there and the people that visit. And as the quality of the downtown comes up, the perceived and real quality of the community rises proportionately. There is a connection. And so we say great downtowns create valued communities, which attracts business and capital and so on, and that provides the tax base to support key community amenities and services. And where it used to be that employers drew people to places, what we're finding now is that more and more places draw employers to them. And I think part of the phenomenon that we've seen in Portland, that even in the recession we continue to have in-migration. It's the sense of place, and the jobs, interestingly enough, follow the people to the places. It's a true paradigm shift. And so people are moving into Portland, and in many cases there aren't jobs waiting for them. They make them up, or they become some sort of electronic internet new business. What are the challenges to downtowns? Always attracting new development. These are in priority order, and I've gone over some of these before with the Commission. These were based on, I think, a survey of about 300 downtowns across the country. Getting people to come into downtown on the weekends and in the evenings because of the competition from the discount stores and the suburban malls. Underutilized or vacant retail space. Parking, frequently a challenge, particularly so, I think, in downtown Oregon City because of the physical constraints of the downtown itself, and it's so narrow, and it's defined by the bluff and the river. And then a shortage of suitable housing. Overcoming image when there's been deterioration. I've been quite vocal, I guess I will be again, about the overpopulation of bars in the downtown. I think that is a deterrent. And then being able to preserve some of the wonderful old real estate that's here. Downtowns compete, and I think Lloyd and I would agree on this. 77% of retail sales occur at discount prices. It's really hard for a downtown merchants group to compete on price. 40% are in discount department stores, and 70% of sales are made on evenings and weekends. And the challenge in a downtown is getting people to stay open in the evening, have events that keep the stores open, having the balance of retail shops that can appeal to shoppers and so on. So this is fierce competition. This is not just Oregon City, this is nationwide. And in some respects it's even gotten stronger because of what's happened with the recession and the way that changes are taking place in the market about how people use credit and how they spend money. So how does a great downtown happen? It happens through a combination of components. The components are, it's not pick and choose, it's not multiple choice. You got to have all of these things working together all of the time. And so we talk about downtowns as being a very highly competitive business that needs to be run like a business and not just a project. It requires leadership, marketing and management structure. You now have, you have that management and marketing structure in place, investment from the public realm, commitment of resources, and staffing. And I always like to show this slide, which is the definition of placemaking by the Urban Land Institute. This is the process of identifying and revitalizing underutilized public and private spaces that result in the fundamental transformation of community.
Dave, just out of curiosity, what city
Yeah.
is that?
Pardon?
What city is that, just out of curiosity?
Boise.
Boise?
Yeah, we've done a lot of, we've done about 20 projects in downtown Boise. And so there is a correlation between quality and value. And what we see is that when a city is insistent upon quality in its development, that not only does that benefit the downtown, but it really creates strength in the assets that are constructed. That as the strength of the downtown goes up, the value of the assets that are placed there in terms of buildings should be stronger over time. And, for example, in strip centers, it's not unusual to see the economic life start to trend down after as little as 10 to 12 years. Once the anchor tenant is gone in a strip center, the value sort of drops out of the bottom. And so downtowns can overcome that kind of phenomena. So I'm going to let Brian talk a little bit about the north end, and he and Lee Iverson have been working quite a bit, and I have too, but you ready to tackle this?
Yeah.
No.
You have a question?
No.
Okay.
I was commenting on the nice-looking building there.
You mean the rust-colored one?
Yes.
No, I like the white one.
Dave, there's a few slides up here that you may want to speak to. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about residential trends in general, apart from the north end. And first, people are moving downtown. Average household sizes across the country are getting smaller. We'll show a little more information about that. More people are working from home. Many people are seeking a more diverse set of environments, not just the single-family suburban home that we saw throughout most of the 20th century. Variety of products in these places, and ease of getting to work, and short-circuiting a long commute. We took a quick look at the composition of households in Oregon City compared to some other major cities. This is Oregon City is lower than these other major western cities. But as you can see, Oregon City has 56% about of 1- and 2-person households. That equals about 6,000 households just in the city alone. That's what we often look at as kind of the basis for what's your market for downtown residents. They're most often 1- and 2-person households, although in later stages there certainly do get to be some families. So that's a considerable market.
Yeah, but the market draw would be much larger than Oregon City.
Absolutely.
It's an indicator.
So based on a number of lists and surveys that people have done across the country, this is a good list of the things in relatively top to bottom order that people are seeking when they decide or consider living downtown. These are the things they want to see in close proximity walking to their houses. Restaurants, grocery stores, coffee shops, bookstores, convenience stores, etc.
Well, our experience in about 80 downtowns is that there is an evolution of housing, and it tends to start out in the beginning with the rehabilitation of existing structures. It's usually a relatively affordable purchase for rehab, and then as the market takes hold, it moves into the next generation, which is some new, usually modest scale. And you could see this in the Pearl in the 90s until it reached the point where it became very, very high-end 14-story structures. But in the beginning, it was converting lofts, converting warehouses, then some 2-story, some 3-story, 4-story, and so on. I want to talk about floor area ratios a little bit. We were talking before the meeting started, one of the really significant, probably the most significant barrier to redevelopment in centers is parking. And when we go from surface parking to a structure, the cost goes from a couple $1,000s to well over $20,000 a space. And it's a formidable barrier. I would go so far as to say that 95% or higher of the centers in the Portland region cannot afford structured parking, and it takes significant public subsidy to do it. So we're trying to find a balance between... Yes.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
I was mentioning to the Vancouver trip, and we saw a lot of parking that was put under a resident, and I actually show some slides, for example, of a residential building that looked like it was early 20th or late 19th century architecture, although it was brand new, and in this Victorian-style building, there was parking underneath it and a drive going under. Is that considered structured parking when it's tucked underneath the building, or does the term structured parking typically only mean a freestanding parking deck?
I would say that would be part of structured parking, once it's inside the structure, because it's either had to be dug down to accommodate it, or the buildings had to be lifted up to accommodate it, tuck-under parking. So we're not saying don't build any structured parking, but we're trying to find a way to get housing underway without massive subsidy, and we don't think it's necessary. So what we're saying is the floor area ratio is the ratio of the land area to the building area. So if you have a 0.5, let's assume that an acre is 44,000 square feet, which it is approximately, and a 0.5 FAR then would be one half of that, or 22,000 square feet. So a one-story building would be one half of the site covered. A 1 FAR, which would be the same amount of building area as the land at one story, covers the entire site. And a 1 FAR at 4 stories, still 44,000 square feet of building, opens up a lot of land that can be accommodated, at least in early years, for surface parking. So what we've been doing in a number of cities trying to get development going is we said, let's take 0.75 FAR as a target. This allows us to build 3- and 4-story structures and create a really powerful sense of urbanity. It's a little different if you're in the Pearl and you can build 12-story buildings, but you can't do that in most suburban centers. At 0.75 FAR, approximately as a target, we can get 3- and 4-story buildings along the street. That creates a tremendous sense of urban environment, allows us to park behind the buildings, and if we planned this properly, and it's done in clusters of housing, to be able to come back over time and build a structure if we want to add more housing later. But somehow we've got to get these centers performing better than they are, because they are underachieving throughout the region. And so we're trying to find a solution that could give middle-income households a way to buy into the North End, and at the same time not have to absorb the cost of expensive parking. Now, it doesn't. It's a principle, and it probably isn't going to hold up all the time. But as a strategy, we see it as a barrier to centers going forward. Okay.
So this is the area we were looking at, was generally between 10th and 15th, McLaughlin to Center. Number of goals here, which will be illustrated later, but making it a safe, friendly, convenient, lively place, new gateways to the north end, or we'll show you a number of different housing types, creating a greener and softer environment, trying to connect to the river, walkability, parks, plazas. It's a long list. Sound mitigation and sound masking, I'll talk a little bit about that. Retain the existing character and keep and grow the businesses. First of all, we looked at the public realm, and which in many cases throughout this area has a lot of hardscape, is not particularly, at this point, friendly to residential uses. So just in general, we felt there was a need to come up with a planting plan, whether that's wider strips on the sidewalk, median strips, more trees. That can be fleshed out in more detail later, but more greenery for more livability. This is the overall survey, which includes infill opportunities in buildings and kind of the traffic flow and access. In general, we categorize things, we saw three major gateways, which are coming off of McLaughlin, 10th, 12th, 14th. A lot of this is things that you guys have, many of you have observed as well, and it doesn't take too long driving along McLaughlin to recognize that there are several major ways to get into the area. And so these are importantly, these are the ways, those gateways on McLaughlin are the ways that people enter the area and also their first perceptions. So there's opportunities on McLaughlin at each one of those places to have an iconic structure that says, "Welcome to Oregon City" in some way. Daphne?
Are you going to, this C and the M and the R
Yes,
are...
yes.
Get into it.
Thank you. Yeah. C is commercial, M is mixed use, and R is residential. And I'll go in greater detail on each one
Now,
of those.
I have to say, Commissioner, this is a beginning, so we're trying to illustrate principles, but we're trying to drill down a little bit and be specific and address some problems at the same time. Whether that's what happens at that intersection remains to be seen. That's worthy of a lot more investigation if the commission wants to go there. But we had to start somewhere.
And in general, the way I'm going to go through the next about 15 slides is working from south to north. And there's a lot of street-level photos. And generally, I'll start on McLaughlin. There's going to be some photos of the corners of McLaughlin. Then we'll come in here, look at photos of the east side of the street, and then turn around and look at the west side of the street. Coming in on the 10th Street corridor, let me go back. So we saw opportunities for commercial buildings in each one of these areas. The high traffic aspect of 10th made us think that this is a good spot for businesses to locate. The light allows full movement there. There's a lot of the notes. I'm not going to go through each one of these notes. The pretty typical refrains are that we'd like to see more greenery, as we say down here, and in this case, capitalizing on the views up the hill. And then in each one of these, we'll have an example of the building type that, more or less, that we envisioned as a possibility here. Again, on the southwest, there's certainly, in the near or long term, a possibility to densify that corner. And on the northwest corner, an existing building. So in the medium term, not a lot of opportunity to infill there. As we move up, there's a lot of hardscape here. We saw the need to add some street furniture, some special paving that indicates where pedestrians are more protected when they're walking, and some branding and portals to say, "Welcome to the Transit Center," there. Again, some opportunities for some infill on both of those sites on the 11th. And again, a similar scale of commercial building. On the 12th Street intersection, just like we had the major gateways up here, we saw each one of the corresponding intersections at 10th, 12th, and 14th to be really the major opportunities because you have people driving through those areas. And we did limit ourselves mostly to Main Street, but we recognize that there's a lot of opportunities to, in some cases, east, to build up the hill. Another reason that we encouraged, we thought that commercial was possibly a better use to the south on 10th is because you have the railroad tracks bending in there. And as you get further north, you get a little more separation, and maybe residential would have a better chance to work. As far as residential, we also felt that orienting the units north-south rather than east-west would have, or possibly northwest would be better, is because you get a little better river view that way, and you also can do some, according to Iverson Architects, you can do more sound buffering from McLaughlin and the railroad. Again, this is coming off of McLaughlin, some pretty significant redevelopment opportunities there. As you're entering the city, there's some possibilities for some branding, place-making, iconic gateway moments.
There's a lot of, effectively, land banking in this area. There's a considerable amount of open space that could be redeveloped.
Absolutely.
But what we're trying to convey is that the public realm is critical to setting the environment for the private sector to come in and build structures. So it's, and they need to be done as a package. And so the idea of greening it up and branding it and creating the gateways is we have to create a new environment in this area, which has been neglected.
These two corners have existing uses. Even so, they could be redeveloped in the midterm, and in some cases, the businesses that are there could be put back into a ground floor retail use. On the west side of the 12th corner, there's some major vacant parcels which could be redeveloped. At this intersection, we think due to the size of the parcels, you could get some larger scale buildings and still have the opportunity to surface park them and thus lower the total cost.
But those are four-story buildings. That's significant.
Absolutely.
It's not, like I say, it's not the Pearl, but that is significant for a suburban downtown. And even three stories.
And then we've got some somewhat lower density, or what we would think of as urban density, wood frame housing options. And you can still get a really nice sense of urbanity and reinforcing the street, what's happening on the street and the feeling of the street through things that are not, 4 or 5 stories. On 13th, no major redevelopment opportunities on the west side. You've got existing buildings there, but again, some opportunities to add some greenery. On the east side, there are a couple vacant lots, and you could do mixed use on the northeast and residential on the southeast. And here's some examples of the building types that are possible there. On 13th, we're looking at the west side now, existing buildings on both corners. Now we get up to 14th, and another major gateway and another redevelopment Main Street corner there. The environment, we felt that the 12th Street, as you get further north, obviously there's more traffic. There's less of a feeling of being in downtown Oregon City, and so as you get further, especially to 15th, it's probably more of a commercial use area. You can still do buildings that are 2+ stories up there, but it's probably more suitable, particularly on McLaughlin, for more commercial uses. Some more photos. The east side. Particularly on the southeast corner, that could be a redevelopment site. The northeast building is a little newer. And here's some of the building uses types that you could locate there.
It's the scale that we're trying to communicate rather than the design.
Yeah. Finally, up at 15th, again, particularly on McLaughlin, these are most likely to continue to be commercial areas. Great exposure to a lot of traffic that for eyeballs to see your products and potentially pull in and buy something. Less appealing to residential developers or residents. Let's see. And then at 15th, this would be residential would have to be back from McLaughlin. I don't think that. There's some major sites, as you can see. Maybe you've probably driven by.
Yeah. There's really, in terms of land area and surface area, there's tremendous opportunity here. The challenge is, how do we structure this so somebody is not afraid to be first? And we've seen projects in other places, housing projects, is when they stand alone and they're not part of a cluster of other housing projects, they become very vulnerable. And so I think the strategy then, if this is of priority to the commission, is to figure out how to get 3 or 4 projects underway simultaneously, even if it's only at one block or 2 sides of a street along one section of the north end, but creating a sense of place as much as possible and not having one project just hang out there and be vulnerable by itself. So,
These are some commercial buildings that we could see on McLaughlin and 15th. And then back away from McLaughlin, east of Maine, possibly some housing. So there's the overview map again with the major, what we saw as the major redevelopment, potential redevelopment sites highlighted. And we felt that there were probably a bunch of opportunities eastward, but we weren't able to look at those. And a question I had was just simply code review. I'm not sure how ready the codes are to implement these kinds of developments.
don't know. So they're in working with Lee Iverson and Don Stasny, we said, let's not spend a lot of time on design right now. Let's figure out the structure of putting something together. And so, and you've heard me say this before, is that most downtowns are now revitalized through public-private partnerships, and we do that because it encourages projects that otherwise would not be built, and it can accelerate the investment timeline. Now, we realize right now we're in the middle of a horrible recession and that virtually no developers have money at the moment. But that doesn't mean that we can't be planning now to overcome some of the barriers and to be getting ready for revitalization on the north end. Good. So through public-private partnerships, we want to leverage and use public money strategically. We want to link public projects to private investment. We want to spend the funds where we know we'll get leverage, and there are some city-owned properties in here, which are a great way to begin. We want to see overall a 4 or 5 to 1 private to public investment ratio. And when you're spending public money in these places, it's an opportunity to eradicate problems at the same time. If you're going to pick up a piece of property, let's pick up a problem and make it go away. Good. So we want to trigger additional investment. We want to create an anchor for future projects. We want to create amenities for residents. And the downtown itself on the south end, the Main Street, really is an amenity. And we want to create this sense of place. The architecture and the design will come later, but we've got to think through the structuring of these deals. We do this properly, we get higher quality development, we get a mix of products, we serve various segments of the marketplace, and we create economic development. I'm trying to move quickly through this. So, I'm just pointing out here the differences between the public sector's goals and the private sector, and they are different, and they're not mutually exclusive, but they are different. Well, I'm not going to belabor this now. Let's keep going because I know there's questions. And you've seen this slide before, what we have found in doing a lot of public-private partnerships in various cities is that in simplest terms, if we can find a developer or developers with the right kind of experience, the financial capability, and design excellence, that is the partner that the city should be negotiating with. And that pick the partner and work out the plans together. Ideally, that's the best way to do it. There tends to be an over-dependence on design and sometimes to the detriment of feasibility and implementation. And I think you've heard me say before, we think somewhere around 60% of first-owner mixed-use projects fail or underperform. And as an educated architect myself, I'm a great believer in design, but design has to work with the marketplace and it has to be financially feasible. And we've seen some projects ignore some of the principles and as a result fail. So we don't want that to happen in Oregon City. Good. Every deal is different. There's a variety of tools. I'm really cognizant of the time here. So what we typically recommend is, once we know what we want to do in the north end, then we would send out a request. Let's say, for example, the city has a piece of property it wants to put into redevelopment. Would be to put out a request for qualifications, not a request for proposal, a request for qualifications. Pick the right partner first, or partners, and to implement the kind of housing that we're suggesting here, you're going to have a variety of people participating. And it's great because you can take local builders and teach them how to work in a downtown environment. That keeps the investment local, keeps the supplies local, keeps the capital local, and so on. Once you're together, establish a memorandum of understanding. What are the parties supposed to do? What are their responsibilities? And then from there, if you're selling a piece of property, you go into a development and disposition agreement. If you're merely helping them with their property, then a simple development agreement suffices. And, go ahead. So that's a flyby. This was originally about an hour and a half, and we've been cutting slides out this afternoon trying to get through it. So if you're interested, we could do a longer workshop sometime. Thank you.
Oh,
Yes, sir.
Wait a minute. Mr. Neely had his hand up.
Go ahead.
You can be next.
Okay.
Neely?
So I get to start.
Yes.
Reading your report here, and you may mention something that we really haven't been dealing with too much in Oregon City is low-income housing. That's called out in your report. And I realize you were focusing primarily on Main Street and McLaughlin there, but if you go down into the north end along 15th Street, I think there's some 15th Street and Washington. That area is in effect mixed use, but I think there's some potentials along that corridor. You've got a couple of markets there. You've got Tony's Fish Market. You've got the vegetable market located in that particular area. And one thing in terms of general parking in the area, you have the railroad there's on a trestle, and it seems to me maybe things could be worked out with Union Pacific and so forth to make that available for surface parking underneath.
Yes.
And so I think there are some of those opportunities that could be utilized too. I would visualize that the higher-end housing and even commercials wants to overlook the river. And it's probably not where your low-income housing would be, but I think you might look at that Washington Street section as a potential.
We didn't take it back to
Yeah.
the east, but because, we didn't think we should take it that far without getting a directive from you. But the principles would travel back through that whole district, that whole area in the flat. So I think you could extend what we've been talking about in principle into the rest of the district, and I think it's a great idea to park under the trestle if that's available.
Right.
And also, I know the Pearl has worked out some agreements with the railroad with regard to blowing the whistle. And so that's worth looking into as well.
Commissioner Nocita.
Two questions, Dave. One builds on this railroad question. There's two issues that kind of float in my mind when I look at the north end, and I'm wondering if a response is even quantifiable. I'll toss them out and see what you think. One is regarding the parking issue in the FAR and the amount of parking needed, particularly to do residential development. Given that this is on a pretty significant bus route, the McLaughlin bus route, and also the McAdam bus route, going right to downtown Portland, and we're anticipating the MAX in the future, but I don't want to look that far ahead. I just want to talk about the bus service now. Is it quantifiable, for example, as to how many people wanting to live in an area like this, in a dense neighborhood in a downtown, might choose not even to own a car? And to the point where you could quantify how many residences you could add. We're talking 4 floors. Could you go 6 or 8 if you could quantify how many families or individuals or couples might choose to live downtown without a car, so you wouldn't have to calculate that parking need, and you could be even more dense than one might otherwise anticipate or calculate.
Right. And also whether or not a streetcar or light rail would eventually serve the downtown as well. I suppose it's quantifiable by interpolating from experiences elsewhere. We know in downtown Portland that the parking ratio per unit is somewhere between 0.6 and 0.7 spaces, and that increasingly people are using things like zip cars and so on, where they rent a car when they need it. Intuitively, I would say it would be a while before Oregon City can do that, because you've got to get enough critical mass of housing. The challenge is, and believe me, we think about this all the time in the office, is where do you start? Where do you set the threshold? And how do you set it in a way to get most of what you want, but don't set it so high that it stops development? And I think, and I've been very vocal about this, I'm a great believer in Region 2040, and I've been working with Metro on this, is I think in some cases we've set the bar too high, and what it's done is it's deterred investment from coming into the area. So when I say start with a target of a 0.75 FAR, it would be nice to get it higher, but at some point you can set it where they don't come at all, and I think that's what's happening in a lot of centers. And so we're saying if it's successful, treat the development of housing in tranches, if you will. So you say, okay, for the first 10 years, we'll live with a 0.7 FAR. But then if we get success, we're going to dial it up, and we're going to go to a 1. And then if we're really successful, we're going to go to a 1.25. But you let the market take you there rather than policy. It's kind of a long-winded answer.
No,
but
that's a great answer. That's the type of analysis I was looking for. The other question had to do also with the railroad issue. The skepticism I've encountered regarding residential in downtown is the train. That's some people take it to an extreme I don't agree with, that if the train's down there, that no residential is possible, and it's just like, frivolous to even think about it. And I'm just wondering, in your experience in other areas, and is this quantifiable also? What segment of a market is train tolerant, and to what, if you have a major rail line like we have with very loud horns at the 10th Street crossing, to what extent is that an insurmountable deterrent to residential development?
Well, I think there's a couple parts there, Commissioner. One is, I think that we need to work vigorously to see if we can resolve that sound problem at 10th Street Crossing, either through better barriers or whatever, or I think we should look into what the Pearl has done with regard to the silent run through there, because you got a tremendous amount of housing. Our experience around the country is that there is a fairly high tolerance to be close to rail, that it's not a problem, and if you're not blowing the whistle, it's not a whole lot different than being next to light rail. So it's the sound of the horn which is the aggravator. There are very, very expensive housing districts. The train used to run through Dunthorpe, for example. And there's other parts on the east side where there's some very expensive housing and the train goes through. Over in Vancouver, right along the river, there's extremely valuable housing right behind the train. So the issue is not so much the train, it's the sound is the deterrent. And I think it's worth a very focused effort to see if we can resolve that, because that in itself could be a problem.
Commissioner Walters was next.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you're making a distinction at all between low-income and subsidized housing. We do have two housing developments in Oregon City, and one of them is going through a redevelopment process with Methuen Architects. So Commissioner West is involved in that effort, as well as myself and some
Great firm.
people.
Great
Yeah,
firm.
and I know that if the development goes forward, the redevelopment, that all of those people will need to be relocated, and that there would be, either vouchers or housing. And
Right.
One of the principles of the design is to integrate income types so that the community is better integrated. They don't want to concentrate low-income housing in one specific area. So I'm wondering if there might be some, if that would be something that potentially we would want to pursue or avoid from your perspective.
Well, I think this is sort of my own philosophy, so as opposed to some great professional opinion. I think cities are interesting places because they have diversity and they have character and so on, and I think part of that diversity has to do with the people that live there. Some are wealthy, some are not. I think that's part of the charm of cities. And so you could require, for example, if you were going to use city-owned land to stimulate a project, that a certain percentage of it is affordable. And I think that contributes to a city. When everything is homogenized, it tends to get a little boring. And
Yeah, I guess where I'm
Maybe that's
going
not-
where I'm
maybe that's
going
not
with
the
this is
question.
that, well, I guess from my standpoint, there could be an incentive when you talk about, the climate that we're in today, the lack of financing. Well, the voucher program provides guaranteed rent for your landowners. So I'm just thinking that there might be some incentives there, and I wouldn't want to create a bad result by being attracted to the incentives, but I'm just wondering if that would be something we might take a look at, to match up financing and need using the subsidized housing formula.
Are you saying maybe that would help drive developers in a bad time if they knew that they had a supply
Guaranteed
supply
rent,
of
yeah.
guaranteed rent?
Right.
So, is that I didn't know if
That's what I'm saying, yeah, and that eventually, if there's enough demand, that, that it's a voluntary program, they can either be in it or not, and I don't know if
well, there's
it's
some
something we could...
there's some great
pursue.
projects around that are assisted tax credit projects that are publicly assisted, and you cannot tell by looking at them that they're assisted housing. They fit very nicely into the fabric of a city. I think you want some of that. But there are developers that do only that, and they're very, very good at it, and there's other developers that won't touch it because they don't want the paperwork, because it is demanding. And I think when you're putting together a strategy for this district, that we want a little bit of all of that. There's some that specialize in rental housing, there's some that specialize in for-sale housing. The successful developers have found their niche, and they may modify their design a little bit, but they don't depart too much. And I think that's why I think it's going to take quite a few developers to make this work in the North End. I don't think it's by any measure one developer. I'd be shocked if one developer took it on.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Neely.
When I was saying low income, of course, I was saying of affordable housing, not necessarily subsidized housing, but I realize there are programs that can assist in the affordable housing range. We actually had, maybe about, I would say it's closer to 10 years ago, some Union Pacific come here and talk about the whistle issue. One of the things apparently the railroads have done at certain intersections is they have a triggered whistle at the intersection itself, so the engine is not producing the whistle, the sound is actually being produced at the intersection. And so that may be a possibility. But where we've had, when we've had fatal accidents at that particular crossing and so forth, I think we got to look at that really, really carefully. And it is a major freight corridor. The other one you were talking about, I don't know if it's a major freight corridor or not, but ours is.
It is in Vancouver.
Yeah.
It is in the Vancouver route, but that's very interesting. I would guess that the whistle at the crossing would be much less offensive than the one on the train.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? Where should we go from here? Any suggestions?
Sure, Sly.
Oh.
Yeah, I wanted to add a couple things that...
Mr. Conrad.
Trentlaw.
I know it says Conrad on this thing.
Okay, well,
I know who it is. It's Mr. Bradlaugh.
I just want to let you know that in plan, we've been looking at possible sources of grant money to do some further studies in this whole area. And one is a pot of money that Metro has, and Lloyd Purdy and I met with representatives from Metro, and they're called Development Feasibility Grants, and they're specifically set aside to look at the feasibility of developing parcels that are owned by a city or urban renewal district, and we have 3 parcels right in this area that we own that we could maybe tap some of that money and take a look at some of those parcels. And then there are also two other funding sources. The CET, that's the construction excise tax that we use to fund our concept plans. Well, those monies are now focused for areas inside the UGB. And we're looking, I've talked to Metro about possibly using some of those funds to do a more detailed study of this area. So that's a potential source of funds. And then the third source is DLCD also has funds. And the Planning Department and Lloyd Purdy, we're working at maybe putting some grant proposals in all three of those areas. And there's a good chance we could get at least one of those. So
Great. How does that tie in with Leland's, if Leland were to move forward? I mean, is that something that could fund that? Or is that something would be alongside that, or?
Well, I think we'd want to tie them all together
Okay.
into one process.
And does that funding, do we get some special treatment because we're regional center? As
It
far
helps.
as what do we get? Okay.
The CET funds especially would help.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, there's a number of things. I think Mr. Leland kind of touched on some of that, too. There's a few pieces if we want to move forward before we get too much into the details. I think we need to kind of make sure that we have good support. I think downtown kind of tying in and buying in, that's going to be a key piece. So your Main Street program is going to be a piece of it. I think trying to hone in on, is there an area we want to look at moving forward with? I think then you're going to need to look at the owners of those properties and see if they want to be a piece of that. I think the process that they showed there on one of those slides in terms of the RFQ and those type steps to see if a project can be developed, and then we can see if we can find financing and how you piece those things together. So,
Commissioner Neely.
I think we need a rather broad discussion about it, but, when you first came to us, you were talking about a bookend approach. I never felt particularly comfortable with that, as you know. But this is looking at the downtown area in its own right, I think, and I think it is time for us as an agency, as a commission, to actually look at that. Probably, especially with uncertainties about how the landfill project might proceed and so forth, to perhaps look at things going on the inside as well as what's happening in the Cove area.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned somewhere in your thing that excited me was the word action plan, because I've seen a lot of plans that are sitting on shelves, and personally, I mean, I'm looking for something that has a relatively short-term, I mean, I don't know how to define short-term, but a relatively short-term life and execution, I guess. So,
but before we discount the bookend theory, though, this, especially that north end section, the Cove is definitely going to assist with interest in that when that begins to come together. So the strategy does make that connection.
Right.
So.
But I think the atmosphere has changed, frankly. We've had so many new landowners come into the downtown area and have made these commitments on their own to redevelop what they've got. I think we have such a different atmosphere than we did, 9 years ago, and you headed up the first commission when we started looking at this stuff. I mean, it's really a different picture there in terms of the attitudes of the property owners.
yeah, Commissioner Shaw, you had
I think the easiest way to start this and probably get an action plan together, I think, is to look at the city properties first. And it'd be interesting to see on your plan you had up there to locate those city properties. I don't know if you can do that real quick or not, but to see which city properties are available to do that, just to kind of get things rolling a little bit here.
especially in this particular economy.
Exactly.
Commissioner Neely?
I agree with you, but if we can find actually some partners there with perhaps adjacent properties who say, yeah, we want to do something with this other than what we've got, that we should try to bring them into play, because there may be some things that we can pick up some additional land there that.
Well, I'm thinking that we need to do something that we want to do now, but we kind of need to know what it's going to look like in the whole area when it gets done, rather than starting with a piece. And Mr.
Well, I fully agree with you about an action plan. We're encouraging cities now to, we run into so many plans that have not been implemented, and they look great, and they don't get built. We're encouraging cities now to go into business-driven, targeted plans which have a land use component to it, but are much broader than just land use plans. In other words, what would be the objectives for this section of downtown? How many units do we want to get on the ground? What's the capital that we want to put in place over the next 10 years? And then methodically figure out how to get there. And there are ways to get to it. So if we said we want 400 units or whatever the number is, and we want $100 million worth of investment in the north end, what does it take to make that happen? And then once you know that, or once you've decided that that is your reasonable target, or you bracket the target, then what are the implications that go with that? What are the staffing implications? What are the capital implications? What are the policy and code implications? I mean, one of the barriers right now is entitlement. So many developers, if you want a zone change in the Portland metropolitan area now, you're going to pay $250,000 or more, guaranteed. Even a relatively minor adjustment is $100,000. Imagine if Oregon City were able to say to developers, here's the opportunity, here's the design handbook, we'll put you through this system in 75 days, and you come out the other end with a permit, but you got to play by the rules. What an incentive that would be. It would be almost unprecedented. We did that in Tacoma, and Tacoma now processes, you get, it's 75 days, or you get double your application fee back if you're not entitled. And there's great buildings coming out of it. But they have the rules clearly set out with regard to massing, building heights, and design standards, and they have to comply. I mean, you don't get through the system if you don't play by the rules. But there's things like that that really encourage the investment community to want to think twice about, well, do I go here or do I go to Oregon City, where I know I can enter this system and get out the other side with a permit?
Mr. Norris.
Thank you for the presentation. I think I agree with all the previous speakers, and particularly you, that we ought to really set an action plan and then determine priorities to do it. If we need code revisions, we need to get on it. But I'm very much in favor of setting, whether it's targets or performance standards also. You know, this is the target. If we want 400 units of housing, that's what it is. And then go after it. But without having those targets and letting the world know what we're headed for, it's not going to work. So, I don't know, what would you do first? I mean, do we need to commission an action plan, someone to do it, or do we need to talk more about priority areas? Do we need to attack the goals ourselves? What can you recommend? Because I would really like to implement. I mean, I think it would be great to have a plan that we're really looking at the possibilities. I mean, we've got our downtown manager now, Main Street manager now, and so we have partners that are greater than they were before.
I want to think about it a little bit. The Commission might want to think about, as a possibility, a smaller working committee of the Commission that we could work with and maybe put together an action plan, or at least a strategy to get started. I need to think about what to do first rather than just react here.
We also have a number of moving parts that you're going to have to think how they connect, such as the parking implementation, because, again, we start taking this place up and we're going to relocate some of that there. That has an issue. I think one of the other things that, again, the staff transition we're going to go through here, you're going to have to factor that into it. I think you need to, because these projects will not come together overnight. They're going to take long-term. You're going to think, and this is something that's really difficult for cities to do, is you need to depoliticize development projects, and I don't know how you get there on that one. But we've seen that with the Cove. We don't have a track record of 75 days getting the permit. And we're going to have to figure out how you do that, going over generations of different officials who come and go, and that's difficult.
But if we set that as a performance target, then it would be a goal of ours. I mean, it's not a goal right now to do that.
No, but I mean, you've got to get future
us-
leaders to buy that or accept that same goal as they come on.
Well, I agree, except that if we had a decision package, I think, if that's what you're going to put together for us to really look at, then we would have something concrete. Because these ideas are, they're pretty exciting. It sounds like we all getting kind of energized by them, but, I mean, I really want to know, what can we do next?
Yeah, because if we stopped here, we have nothing.
Exactly. Except a nice presentation.
Yeah, and so let me get back to the commission with
Yeah.
some suggestions.
I see that
I'll
our
talk to Dan as well.
I think I see our Main Street manager is kind of wanting to say, did you want to say something? Sure. Can you need to come up to the mic?
Like Bertie, had to pull up some notes. This might be the right time to ask, for me to ask you all for some guidance on a general outline of a project I was advancing that dovetails very nicely into what Dave and Brian have proposed. Thanks, Brian. I won't be but a minute. And that would tie into the grant that Dan and I will probably be working on, and it's due November 1st, so we'll know fairly quickly after that if this might be a realistic avenue to take. And that would be proposing to do 4 things for downtown that tie directly into this. Define and characterize performance goals for downtown. Take a area of downtown and through a community process, leaders and stakeholders do some discussion about what we want to see happen, how much density, what type of development. That would be one small segment. And then explore those development alternatives. Work with a consultant to show us, not just list it in number form, but show us what that might look like. I've seen too often people say it's good, but then when they see something, that's not what they had in mind. So one stage of exploring the potential through a visual scenario, but not yet getting committed to a specific design. Third step would be showing the numbers. How do things pencil out? How do you take those investment steps? And the fourth would be then creating the right environment. How do we come up with the design guidelines and things that are needed? So I don't know if all those can be done under one a grant, but I know in 2010, Main Street Oregon City really wants to start tackling those issues. If my sense from this group was that this spoke to everybody, I could, with a lot more certainty and more confidence, be pursuing these goals. So without opening up a can of worms, and I don't think I have, that's the direction I'll be heading, unless I hear otherwise from my board of directors, from the city, from this group here. And we'll be doing it in partnership with the city, with consultants that you can help us find. So maybe more on that later. I know I'm throwing a new angle at you. I didn't expect to share this with you because it's all very draft, but that's the direction I'm heading.
Okay. Commissioner Crocker.
I have a quick question about, I think this is great and it's cool to think about, but at the same token, it seems like there's still a lot of work to be done. Like, we haven't really finished anything yet, and we're already talking about the next project. One of those things is I want to ask about, in your experience, part of the things that some of us are thinking about, many of us actually, and especially on Main Street, is streetscape improvements, the sidewalks, the walkability, lighting on the sidewalks, lighting on the streets, repaving the streets, all that stuff. Does that stuff need to be done ahead of time before developers will come in, or will a developer come in knowing that the streets and the sidewalks look like crap and there's no good lighting to get down to the restaurants, knowing that eventually the city will fix that? Do we need to focus on doing the city's part first and then
the shopping district that is Main Street, which is the south end, is a completely different character than what we're talking about on the north end. It would be real easy to take the south end Main Street environment and stretch it out a couple more blocks, and I think that would probably do it in because it would be too long. It's almost too long as it is in terms of walkability. So it's important, I think, to take what you have and strengthen it. Then the question is, and you're going to get a lot of different opinions on that on the question of where do you put your money in terms of finishes. Now, you've got some dangerous situations on some of those intersections where people can trip and fall. There's some repairs that have to be made. Well, I'll be real candid. Pavers don't sell merchandise. Okay, now that's not to say that it shouldn't be attractive. But if you look at successful retailing districts, really successful retailing districts, the money is not on the ground. The money is on the storefront. You want the customer looking straight ahead, not looking down. So I think, and there's a lot of consultants that will sell you very, very expensive street finishes, but I'm not sure it produces sales. And so I think it's a matter of, I'm being really blunt, but it's a matter of finding that combination between having an attractive environment but not spending all your money there so that you've taken it away from the storefronts. Better to put money into storefront grants or joint funding mechanisms with the business owners and get people focused on the stores rather than the pavement. So it's a philosophy, but Rodeo Drive, which is the highest priced retail in the country, has concrete on the ground.
The thing I would add to that, too, that, again, there's some other components you can do to make that connectivity. Again, we've talked about a shuttle service. That possibly is something that would be done on the city side that could supplement that. I think, too, you need to be careful, and Dave, you might be able to speak to this, of making the public investment, assuming that the private investment will follow. If those two aren't connected, you can make a big investment and nothing happens, and that's the last place where we want to be. We want to connect those two. So maybe a master plan showing what some of those improvements would be, and maybe when we get there and how, might be a better selling point than actually putting it on the ground.
You mean in terms of the public investment?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, we're firm believers that just because you build it, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to come. So let's say we had a strategy for one block, and we wanted to put, maybe part of it's city-owned and maybe some of it's private, but we wanted to get 4 housing projects underway. There's a streetscape that goes with it. There may be some other ingredients, a public amenity, a plaza, or something like that. We would want that deal locked down solid between both parties before the construction starts. And that's part of the success in Vancouver, is those deals are all negotiated between the city and the developers. Commissioner Nocita took the tour in Vancouver that I've taken before. It's very interesting.
It's also the connection that we have with the code development, that there are certain milestones that have to be met before we go to the next level of investments.
Yeah, and so you don't spend a lot of money and then hope they show up. They show up before you spend a lot of money.
Commissioner Walters.
I think there is one thing that we can do that will be a high return but relatively modest investment, and I think that's the greenscaping that you talked about on the particularly for the entrances. I think I would like to see us allocate some money, maybe doing a process where we would put together a planting, get put out an RFQ or whatever, and have somebody put together a plan, and that we can implement that plan as funds are available. And I think that would benefit the citizens of this city and have some longevity for whatever the timeline is, and it would be a relatively modest investment, and it would have such a huge impact in terms of the place, whatever you were talking about, the aesthetics of just feeling much more friendly to the human comfort.
I think the Lakota group really focused on that in areas as well, and not just what you're talking about on the sidewalks, but they really made the comment, and I can see it, where our parking areas need, I mean, there's so many areas that we need green, to put a green implementation in, and a lot of that's private. We're going to encourage the private owners of the parking areas to do that, but I agree.
Well, the public realm really is the stage, and the quality of that stage has a lot to do with what happens behind it, the sets, if you will, in the theatrical analogy. And you can see from the photographs, I mean, it's really quite stark. It's a lot of pavement.
Yeah, and I would think that, I mean, I personally would be willing to volunteer time, effort, and materials to, if there was the mechanism to do it and we had a plan, I think we could get some volunteer and donations to support that.
Of course, one of the issues we run into with some of that is not just getting it done, but it's the ongoing cost of maintenance, which is...
Well, that's why you need to come up with a good plan that doesn't require a lot of...
And I think somehow we need to maybe kind of move on with what our next thing's going to be. So, did you want to come back to us after you've thought about it with kind of maybe a game plan on how that we can, maybe take a look at and see what the next steps might be? Is that okay with everybody on the commission? Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Have we made public the whole? We're talking about sidewalks. This plan, Ms. Crushhour, of the, asking for some funds for sidewalks, or do you not want to?
Well, if anybody's been involved in any of the Arch Bridge meetings, which there have been quite a few people, particularly in the downtown, and then we've tried to keep the commission apprised somewhat of the progress of the Arch Bridge, and one of the items we were hoping to achieve with ODOT is to get their support for some funding to install some of the lighting and replace some of the crumbling sidewalks and curb and gutter, and also look at the streetscape. We weren't going to do anything particularly flashy. It was going to be concrete and street trees, and really focus on more finishing touches later with businesses, et cetera. So this is more sort of the real rudimentary infrastructure down there and finishes where we think there's some cleaning up to do.
Okay.
I don't want to be misunderstood by what I was saying. I'm not saying that it's not important to dress up the downtown. I've just seen cities put all of their money into pavers and exotic streetscape, and there's nothing left over where it's needed.
Well, I think what I was just trying to bring about is I think we're trying to find some funds from other places to hopefully begin doing some of this, so I just wanted to make that public. Are we ready to move on? Do we have any other questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You got to move. Mr. Crocker has to make a presentation at Clackamas College, Community College. Thank you. Okay, item 5B, quarterly budget format.
Yes.
Mr. Wimmer?
That'd be me.
Hello, Mr. Wimmer. Mr. Patterson.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, you had asked at some point that you wanted to kind of get budget updates and look at that, so we've put together two things here, a couple of different looks at your budget as well as your first quarter where we stand with this. And if you want changes in the format or looking at this a different way, if we can make it more clear, we're willing to do that. But let me just kind of give you the two that's there. The first page, which says comparison of revenue and program sources, that's pretty similar to what we turn out most of the time. I think that does give you a look. I do need to indicate that where it says adopted budget 2008-09, that's actually should be 09-10. And what you will see is kind of what the budget was adopted, what the activity there is through 9/30/09, and then your balance. I will indicate just a quickie, and then I'll go to the next page there, is that we had anticipated a beginning fund balance of $4.8 million. We actually, and you'll see that there underneath that column in revenues of adopted budget for 08-09, which is 09-010. We anticipated a $4.8 million beginning fund balance. If you look over, just follow that across to the balance, you will see that actually we began the year with 5.3, so we're a little bit better off than what we had anticipated. If you go to the next page, again, you'll see similar types of information, but maybe it will make things a little bit more clear where we're at. You have your amount budgeted. You'll see the amount received through the first quarter, which indicates $4.8 million, and then just kind of looking at what that balance will be. So we're anticipating total resources for the fiscal year in the end to be at $19.6 million. The next line item, or just kind of the next block there is your expenses. Again, we budgeted $518,000 for expenses for urban renewal. We spent roughly $82,000 presently where that's at. You can go down to capital outlay. You will see what the budget amount is, what has been expended. You will see that most of those dollars are all encumbered, with the exception of the amount that you still can spend in rehab loan and grant program, and we're still kind of updating that to make sure that number is correct. You've got $796,000 that's set aside for debt service reserve. So for this year, we actually have a working contingency of roughly $28.4 thousand. We are anticipating that we will end the year with $1.3 million of ending fund balance. That would give us about a 7 or 8% contingency from your expenses minus Again, that will roll over and begin your fund balance, and that's where you might want to look at, again, go back and look at those projections as we go out, as we begin to take on other projects. And again, you've got some major projects underway, the Amtrak station, you have McLaughlin Boulevard project, the McLean building, the Bluff Promenade, those type projects that, we're actually doing very good with that budget, but until those are in, you want to play a little conservative because lots of things can go wrong in those type projects. So,
Okay.
be glad to answer any questions, or if you want to look at a different format, we'd be glad to provide that for you.
Any questions?
Well, I should say, too, the other thing that you're not seeing here, again, you had requested, and the city has approved, a $2.5 million loan from the city. We have not made that yet, so that's not showing in here, so that will add some dollars into that budget. We'll do that later on in the year when we get to the point where we need to do that.
Any questions, comments? Okay, shall we move on? Lost my agenda. There it is. Item 5C, Charter Amendment, Public Vote on Bonding and Plan. Staff, Mr. Patterson?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is an issue you have continued to discuss. I think the last time this came up, you had asked for this to be on the agenda, and seeing no objection to that, it is here. I think, too, Commissioner Nocita has proposed to you some language changes for that. This is a decision for you to make one way or the other. Again, with what you just heard Mr. Leland, again, you want to look at if, again, the question of whether you would wish to vote on bonded debt given projects, or maybe some ways else you want to propose doing those. What I have recommended to you, again, I don't think that is a solid course of action. I think if you do want to consider approving a plan or major plan amendment, that's a horse of a different color, and that's something you may want to look at in terms of any major thing like that voting on in the public. I think that gives you a basis to move a plan forward, but looking at each project or every time you have to issue debt, I think you seriously want to consider whether you wish to do that or not. And I would not recommend that you do that, but that's a decision you'll have to make.
Commissioner Nocita.
I just want to make a rather tongue-in-cheek comment that I hope will be accepted with the humor that it's intended. And that is, after next March, I hope we get such unbiased and dispassionate recommendations from our next city manager as we have from Mr. Patterson on these matters. I don't think this is as dark and cloudy as the city manager characterizes it. And again, it comes, for the most part, with examples from other communities. The issue of voting on specific bond issues, I mean, if we issue a general obligation bond, the charter requires us to have it done through a public vote. Issuing urban renewal debt, I'm not sure I see where the difference lies, and that it can be done, maybe not under these terms, but under, I don't think it's unfeasible and unwise to do that. Just to remind folks, that I brought this to the City Commission early on in my tenure, and unfortunately the reason that it has been on the agenda here in the Urban Renewal Commission is because the majority of the Commission kind of kicked this issue down to the Urban Renewal Commission. I'm not sure.
Kicked out.
I think that's a joke, too. To Whereas, I mean, referring to a charter amendment to, I don't even think the Urban Renewal Commission has the authority to do that. Maybe the majority of the members of the commission can explain for themselves why they acted to send the item to the Urban Renewal Commission. But I think this language works. There's one typographical error in the first paragraph that should read, including any urban renewal agency without first obtaining approval of the voters of the state at a regular or special city election. And a couple of people have pointed out that typo to me. So I know this, for the discussion, I think I would like to hear from my fellow city commissioners as to why they thought that this Urban Renewal Commission was the appropriate forum for this discussion, and where they think, how they feel this commission should or should not act on an item like this.
Commissioner Neely, I'm sorry.
First of all, I agree with you. I mean, I think there's two ways that a charter amendment can be put forward, by city initiative, by citizen initiative, or by the city commission putting it to a vote of on the ballot. You can't change the charter without going to the people with the charter revision. But I think the answer to your question is very simple. This would be the agency that would be impacted by any such decision, and therefore it seemed perfectly reasonable that this is a place where discourse on this particular subject should occur.
Commissioner Norris?
Yes, I agree that this is the forum because this is where all things urban renewal are discussed. I guess my response to this is that because I'm one that looks for good ideas in many places, I love to steal good ideas, and I guess if this was a good idea, another jurisdiction would have done it.
Any other, Commissioner?
Commissioner Nacita. What Commissioner Norris is meaning by this? A charter language for other people?
No, vote on the bond. I'm bringing urban renewal bonds to a public vote.
Okay.
That would, I mean, there are no examples. So if it was a good idea, it would have been done in at least one place.
Commissioner West?
Well, I guess I would follow Commissioner Neely's rhetoric there, but I'm not interested in doing this because it's kind of like changing the goalpost rule halfway down the game here, and you have some developers that have spent, Mr. Leland was talking about a 75-day process. You take the Cove developers who've been here, 4 years, working on this, and to all of a sudden put any of their project funding on shaky grounds would be the biggest turnoff to economic development in this city has ever seen, and the message would not only be with the Cove, the repercussions of that would spread throughout the development community. So when we talk about tools in the toolbox, and I know, Commissioner Nacita, you really care about getting that downtown going, that this is a tool we can use. We're very fortunate to have it, and I don't want to put it at jeopardy. I would like to always be reviewing things with our group, so it's a judicious use of it, but I don't want to put the tool in jeopardy.
Mr. Patterson?
I want to clarify, too. I think talking or comparing what this agency does with the city confuses the issue. And I understand where that parallel on the surface could be drawn. City very seldom goes out for general obligation bonds. In fact, in my tenure in Oregon City, I'm trying to think if we have done that, and I'm not remembering an issue. So it's an infrequent process to do. The Urban Renewal Board is a development agency. If you become successful, you will have multiple projects. If you have to take multiple projects to an election, one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, do you have the energy to do that? Because election is expensive, takes time, takes a lot of energy, and development projects, as we have seen, are very difficult to explain all the nuances of those public-private partnerships and expect you're going to have a successful result.
Commissioner Neely?
Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, although I'm probably one of the few people that was around when this thing was up and running for the commission at the same time what happened in the city. We had a couple bonds that came forward. I think one was for a reservoir, I think, probably in the Park Place area, and the other one was really, well, a city-initiated in that we have members. I think the other one was a bond for the relocation of the pump station for the water facility. When those things came forward, there was a dramatic increase in the utility bills to cover those bonds. And I think a large portion of our utility bill does still cover the payment down of those bonds. That triggered a ratepayers revolt. And part of that, they brought forward the current restrictions that we have in terms of the 3% increase on the water portion of our utility bill, but it also triggered the bonded indebtedness going to a vote of the people. At least one of those bonds would have been regarded as an emergency situation, since the pump station wasn't getting the water it needed to supply the city. So it was a specific, I think, set of events that trigger those initiatives going forward. The city put in its own own ballot title on the bond piece, because it would have forced you to go, if you had an existing bond and you wanted to rebond it because of a lower rate, that it wouldn't be possible without going to the vote of the people, which would be too late. And so there was a revision. It was the city's version that changed, but it was simply to have an alternative out there. So it was an emotional reaction that created that particular situation. That being the case, we have what we have at the city's level. If we had a situation that we were trying to generate new monies beyond the revenues that we get currently, I could understand why we would want to take such a thing to the people. But we're working within a budget of a fixed amount that comes into the Urban Renewal Agency. It's either through the sale of properties or through the increment, the tax increment that we have there. So we're not obligating any additional monies in the process of any projects that we undertake. We can't. I mean, we're limited to the 3% increase in tax rate.
And Urban Renewal bonds doesn't raise your overall tax rate, because that's already built into your combined rate.
So we don't have. I mean, it's a case of having good decision makers on this body. Frankly, I think is what's critical. And
I have a question. I mean, I tried to go back and look today, but the urban renewal plan that was voted on by the electorate, what kind of detail did that have back when the district was formed? Did it have budgets and?
Yeah,
the boundaries is what I'm saying.
Yeah, you had to develop boundaries. Again, it was you have to outline projects. You have to outline. I don't believe, and again, that was loud. I don't think when Oregon City formed its urban renewal district, I don't know if that was done through a vote or not. I think that might have been an act of the city council.
I don't think any plan or the creation of the urban renewal district in Oregon City has ever gone through a vote. And there might, I mean, if the commission feels there's a midpoint between voting on individual bonds and voting on, major plan amendments, because we're not talking about a new district here, unless we do something back up on Hilltop again. That includes a description of how bonds are issued. That might be a compromise or, a medium. But I don't know to the extent that anyone on this commission would even be interested in pursuing that medium. So I'd be interested in hearing the opinion of other commissioners on that.
Did somebody else have their hand up over here? No? One thing, I do really strongly believe that having this requirement would really limit our ability to make the kinds of agreements and bring the project forward that are going to benefit the community significantly in the future. I mean, for a long time I've heard why don't we have more police? Why don't we have all these services? Well, I mean, some of the things that we've seen happen right now, in the future, have the best opportunity to increase the operating budget for our city of anything that can happen. And so, I just really would be concerned that it would so limit what we're trying to do that we would be ineffective. Commissioner Shaw?
In trying to educate the public about this kind of detail that we have to go through here to do these projects and stuff, all they see is kind of the superficial things in our papers and things, and so it would be very detrimental in the progress of these projects, So, I agree that there's certain things that certainly the public's got to be involved with. But in this case here, where we have a budget, we follow it, and to keep progress going, I think it's necessary to keep doing the way we are. Because like I say, you just can't educate the public the way we would have to in the detail and stuff that goes on in these projects,
The other thing that goes along with that, I think, is, the fact that everything we're doing is open. And, we're not doing something behind closed doors. And, we're not trying to make decisions without anybody out there having the option to come and become involved in this decision-making process and give input. And we have some from time to time. So, all I'm saying is I think the opportunity for the public to be involved is there. Commissioner Nocita?
Some pretty profound differing viewpoints on both to what Commissioner Shaw said and to what Commissioner Chair Slack has said, because I do think that it can be said that to a certain extent things have gone on behind closed doors. This commission, for example, on the Cove development, the city manager and the council for the Urban Renewal Commission negotiated these disposition and development agreements behind closed doors with the developer. We were not consulted at the outset of these negotiations as to what the parameters were. We were presented with a yay or nay decision at the tail end. We were not approached at the outset, for example, as to whether it was a good idea to spend $2 million of taxpayers' money on real estate that an appraisal had given no value to. So, the process, I think if you put that kind of negotiation and decision-making to a vote of the people, I think they do have a right to say, we don't agree with spending our money like that. I think they do have the right to give that final stamp of approval on such types of deal-making.
But they did have that right, as we all did. We could have said no to those agreements if we felt but the public could have come forward to object. Everything was available to the public. Mr. Patterson.
Again, there's a couple of things. First of all, let me state too, and I apologize, I didn't get a chance to look at this. In terms of major plan amendments, some of the new legislation changes the way urban renewal will work in the future if we do that, and because you have to, if you're going to expand, you got to take some things out. I'd have to look back and get you all that detail, but it had changed the lay of the land. Going to the last points, and Commissioner Nocita kind of came in this after this project was underway, which I think probably leads to some of that confusion. Again, we did go through a very lengthy discussion initially about the Cove. There was a memorandum of understanding. Conceptually, what was talked about was all developed and discussed and approved as we went into those negotiations. That was delegated for me to put together. We did have to do a major plan amendment, which did talk about the amounts of money that would be used, in which the amount of money for the Cove was thoroughly talked about. The individual pieces of that, again, I don't know how you do that and expect that anyone is going to understand all those moving parts, but the $10 million was approved in the plan amendment. That was negotiated in terms of putting a deal together. That was brought before you. That has been aired through public hearings, public meetings, and that's what the Urban Renewal Commission, after looking at that, and there was debate and some disagreement, approved. So none of that was done behind closed doors without a public vetting, and that's just a mischaracterization of how these processes work. And I think to do it otherwise, in what we were talking about here with the public-private partnership, I think you would have to question whether you could get any of that done in the future, or if you could find people who would really want to work with you if each of the components have to be, they're going to want to talk about the overall thing, and you'll need to approve the bigger picture. And it also depends on how much of the detail you want to bog down into. So,
Any other comments or questions? Commissioner West first.
No, I was just going to
Oh,
say,
okay.
we're ready to move on.
Okay, Commissioner Nocita had something.
Well, I just I don't want to just, let this conversation end without any type of action. I'm just to stake out the political territory. This is, I think, the text of an amendment that would give the voters the most say in the way urban renewal operates. And on that basis, I'm going to make a motion that the Urban Renewal Commission recommend to the City Commission to place the draft Urban Renewal Charter Amendment, that is the exhibit to Agenda Item 5C, to the voters at an election that of the City Commission's choosing.
I'll second for a vote.
Okay, we have discussion? Commissioner? No. Okay. Call for question.
Commissioner Nocita?
Aye.
Commissioner Neely?
No.
Commissioner West?
No.
Commissioner Norris?
No.
Commissioner Walters?
No.
Commissioner Shaw?
No.
Commissioner Peterson?
No.
Chair Slack?
No. The motion fails 8-1.
7 to
8 again.
1 to 7.
1 to 7.
Mr. Weisman can count.
And read fast.
And read fast, yeah.
Okay. How are we doing time-wise here?
we still got some things covered, because I do
have
some things on the menu.
Okay. Item 5D, Urban Renewal Storefront Grant Application for a store sign at 707 7th Street, McHale Chiropractic.
Just a point of information on this item, Chair Slack.
Sure.
Didn't we determine that we had exhausted all the funds in the storefront grant?
Well, I think we made a motion to not do any more. There was a little bit of money left. But that motion, this was before us, before that. It wasn't, the motion that I think passed was not intended to be retroactive to something before, that we had before us.
There was
And this
partial on this
actually
done, and
before
then
us.
this was the second part
So
of it.
this was...
As stated in the
So
report.
Ms. Grushauer will explain that, I think.
Yeah, and Commissioner Nocita, just so you can read it in the report, it does indicate that this was submitted before the moratorium was requested by the Urban Renewal Commission. And this is for the sign for McHale Chiropractic Clinic. The initial awnings and storefront improvements were approved by the Urban Renewal Commission, and the sign needed to go through some historic review, and Christina Robertson Gardner has been working with the applicant, and whereas before she really felt like it had to go to the board because it had some things that she wasn't sure they would approve, he's made some revisions which have allowed her to sign off on the sign application. So the other thing with I think the other improvements were somewhat weather dependent, and the commission agreed that they wanted to move forward with those weather dependent grant components, whereas the sign, of course, is not. So the sign has been signed off on by Christina, and we would the actual sign permit application, which goes through planning, which is part of the grant application, we would ask that she be the person in planning that continued the process of signing off on the sign permit. And otherwise, it's fairly straightforward, I believe.
Okay. Do we have any questions or comments?
And there is this amount of money left in the grant program.
That was a question I was going to ask.
Right, yeah, no, we've determined that.
On motion?
Yes, please.
I make a motion that we approve the Urban Renewal Storefront Grant application for the store sign at 707 7th Street on McHale Chiropractic.
Second.
Okay, did you have do we need an amount in there? Or did you say the amount?
I didn't say the amount. It's at $1,784.75,
Yes.
which is a 50-50 match by the city and the applicant.
And we have a second? Discussion. And we call the roll, please?
Commissioner Nocita?
Aye.
Commissioner Neely?
Aye.
Commissioner West?
Aye.
Commissioner Norris?
Aye.
Commissioner Walters?
No.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson?
Aye.
Chair Slack?
Yes. Aye. Motion passes 7 to 1. 7 for, 1 against. Okay. Item 5E, minutes of June 3rd, 2009 regular meeting.
Move approval?
I have a motion and second for approval of minutes. Discussion? You want to call them?
Commissioner Nocita?
Aye.
Commissioner Neely?
Aye.
Commissioner West?
Aye.
Commissioner Norris?
Aye.
Commissioner Walters?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson?
Aye.
Chair Slack?
Aye. Motion passes 8 for, 0 against.
Just one comment, if I might.
Yes.
It's a concern that I've been bringing up a lot, and along with the issue of minutes from executive sessions, Commissioner Nocita and I have requested the issue of untimely minutes and so forth come into a study session discussion. You'll see that we're way behind on
Yes.
our minutes.
May I make a comment?
Sure.
We have a new transcriptionist who is working with me to have the commission meeting minutes up to date by the end of 2009. So that I'm very much aware of the delay here, but we have a plan to make them up to date by December 31st.
And that contract calls for a turnaround of what time?
The minutes to this meeting will be on the next meeting, so a 7-day turnaround.
That's good.
So hopefully we'll solve that issue. I am a little bit concerned with it because it is another single party who will be doing that. So, the backup to question, so we'll have to kind of work through that if, again, they become ill or gone, how that takes place. But we're trying to correct that issue. And that's just a question of dollars.
City manager's report.
Yes. I have 3 items for you I'll run through very quickly. Question had come up in regards to looking, as I recall, I think that was the projections that Mr. Parks had put together in regards to professional services. It indicated an expenditure there in 1 year of $1.28 million. That was based on going back and looking at that, and again, I think we talked about this during the budget process, some projections. That's when he did that work, and a lot of that we were projecting at that time of a lot of work on the Cove and the rivers both that year. That didn't all materialize, so the actual expenditure that took place that year is $664,000, pretty much in line with what you have. And if you'll flip that memo I just gave you over on the backside, and Ms. Bankhead, Mr. Neely needs one there as well, and then back over behind you and the audience, you will see the breakdown of those.
We already have them.
Oh, you do? What do I know?
Yes, we
Yeah.
do.
Well, we just like running off paper, I guess. Audience probably, and then Nancy will need to get one. Anyhow, that just gives you the breakdown on that. I'll try to answer any questions that you have. Hopefully that answers the questions that you had in regards to that. You'll also see who the vendor is, a little bit of description. That's not a thorough, detailed description, but it'll give you an idea of what type of work was going on there. So.
Any questions or comments?
Next issue is, Commissioner Slack, you had asked me in regards to kind of where we go from here, kind of on the Cove issue. Just want to kind of give you a quick update on what we're working on. Mr. Wimmer and I have been talking with both U.S. Bank and Bank of America in regards to the credit facility. We're in the process of obtaining a letter of interest, and we're working to get that to you sometime before the 15th of November. Likewise, there are some closing documents that Pacific Property Search, which is now CCLLC, is drafting on documents for the Parker property. They'll be working on that, and I've got Mr. Janik working on both the Glacier assignment, the urban renewal draft assignment, closing documents in regards to that Pacific property. Again, we're trying to get all these ready prior to the 15th, and I need to get with Mr. Kabisman and talk with him, because we'll need to do some type of deed transfer of that sliver of property that the city owns to the urban renewal agency along Cove. So all those things hopefully will be coming to you here before the 15th.
Okay, and there was a positive decision planning a week
That's right.
ago Monday.
It did go through the Planning Commission. They did approve the land use. There were some minor conditions that were put on that, so they're tidying up those details as well.
And one reminder, I know I've talked with a couple of you about this, but as we get into the negotiations with treatment plant, I'm really hoping we keep that purple pipe potential somewhere up there and don't let it fall to the side. So
I think the whole sewer discussion is kind of purple right now, so we'll...
Blue.
I guess I think all of us would love to see that site, especially as close as it is to the treatment plant, landscape with purple water. So anyway.
Final issue that you may want to have a joint discussion. Commission has been talking about the hiring of an economic development staff, and again, I think we're getting to the point where you're going to, definitely I think you need to look at urban renewal staff, especially with the transition. I think all of you are aware that I'll be retiring, and so we're going to go through that transition. Depending on what you do here with Mr. Leland as well as these projects, there's a lot of work that has to be followed. We may be in a position now that you need somebody to make sure those balls do not get dropped. So, again, whatever the thinking is the Commission has and where the urban renewal agents have, you probably want to have that joint discussion and kind of figure out how you might want to proceed with that. Need to keep in mind the amounts we've got budgeted here, so that's there's some implications both for the urban renewal budget as well as for the general fund in those discussions. But
Is there a thought in what you're saying about joint funding of a position, or?
Well, the money that's budgeted right now for that quote-unquote position is urban renewal funds.
Oh, it is, okay.
So on a broader basis, the Commission is going to have to figure out how to fund that portion of it, but, there's some ways we can look at that. And how broad do you want the position? I mean, I don't know if you need to have an economic development coordinator and an urban renewal manager. They could probably do both, so it might be a need to talk about the function itself, but in particular, you may need maybe more than one staff person to run your urban renewal program, depending on what all you get into.
Should we have that as a agenda item for the next or a future meeting? Anything else that we need to talk about tonight? If not, meeting's adjourned.